Welcome back. I'm the Watch Nerd. On today's video, I've been very much looking forward to this because I love Rolex. I'm the first one to admit it. I think Rolex is the coolest brand out there. Omega has 50 years more of history. I'm not talking about the high end like Patek Philippe. That's a different conversation. I don't include those kind of in the same conversation sometimes. They are both watches, but I'll get into that in a later video. I am comparing probably the most two competitive companies with each other for the spotlight. Omega has won battles. Rolex is ahead right now because if you ask somebody what's the greatest watch in the world, they'll tell you a Rolex most of the time. But I want to compare two of their dressier lines. I have a Seamaster, but it's a Deville, so it's a 34 millimeter case. And then to match it, because they go very similar, I have a Rolex hand-wound Oyster Perpetual, and this one is the 6422. We're going to be doing some measurements, but I typically don't get into measurements because it's kind of boring on my channel, but I will do some because this is for the comparison. Before I flip you around, quickly remind you about the Chanel chain giveaway. I'm going to be giving this out as soon as we hit 1,000 subscribers. Directions in the description below if you want to be entered. Now, first flipping ourselves around, if we're taking a look at these two pieces, you can tell there's very similar. We're going to talk about the similarities first, and then I'll go into the differences. But we have Rolex in one corner, Omega in the other. Both of these are 50, 60 pieces from the 1960s and 50s. This one is from 62 right here, this Omega, and the Rolex is from the 50s here too. So it's very, very similar time period, and we have the same case shape. Omega markets this watch as an everyday piece. It's sporty enough to wear with a pair of shorts, but it's also dressy enough to go out to a dinner with. I completely agree. I've been wearing this watch for a while now. I got this piece for my birthday. I'm very happy about it. You can go to your job every day with this piece, or you can go to a nice dinner, or whatever job you have, you can really do, unless you're really banging up the watch, but it's like a tank. On the other hand, this Rolex is a tank. Like, this is it's built for a purpose. It's going to stay, and you could tell that with this watch, with both of them. But that's sort of where the similarities end. The look, the aesthetic is pretty much similar, and then they're both time only. So that's another big thing. Both of these watches are time only. Both of them don't have hacking, but the Oyster, Rolex Oyster, only has, as you can see here, if I pop it out, no hacking, and it's just, there's no hacking. It's very, very simplistic. No chronometer status either, certified. And that means plus or minus 2 seconds. So these are a little off, but they both perform fantastic, depending on how long you have the service, of course. But both of these watches, and this is Oyster, so this is really 100 meters. That's what you're looking at with the screw down crown. That's what they give on Datejust. On here is a Seamaster, believe it or not, and the name doesn't mean, so it's just a push-pull pin crown on this. And I'm not talking about price yet, but that definitely has to be factored in. So it's just pull, push pin. Other functions, one of these, the Rolex, believe it or not, has no rotor in there. So you have to wind it up every day. It's not going to last 48 hours, around 32 I get with this. A little more, a little less, depending on this piece. Now, on the Omega, I really don't have to because there's an actual rotor inside. This is the 550 movement. Unreal movement from Omega. If you look up the 550, they made the next version, the Constellation line, which was chronometer certified, so it was plus or minus 2 seconds, and then they made this movement in 24 jeweled with the chronometer status one. But this is only the 17, which is fine. It still performs excellent. Maybe 13 seconds worse days. I actually got a day where it was in chronometer status, even without hacking it. You can kind of both of these, you can kind of wiggle around that minute hand, and then it will stop the second hand if you go back and do it that way. But both of these watches, unbelievable timekeeping. The Rolex 2 though, but the Rolex is only hand winding. Now, that's going to come into play, and that's why I brought my caliber tool here. We're going to see the thickness of both of these watches. I understand this is more sporty, but it should be thinner than this watch. It should be, because they're both that type of aesthetic. That's how it would be. I understand this one's waterproof, but we're going to see. We'll make up, you can make up your own mind about it. First, the Rolex. Now, they're both acrylic glass, so it shouldn't make a difference. I think the Rolex is a bit thicker on that acrylic, but let's check here. Going to the top and the bottom here, it's around 12.3. I'm getting 12.3 I'm getting on this with that acrylic glass. So let's see with the Omega now. Going to the Omega. We are getting a thickness about 10.2. That's what I'm going to give it at. So 10.2 versus the 13 on the other. Yes, you're getting a thinner overall watch with automatic parts in it. So it shows you the Rolex, they didn't try to go for thin watches. I think that's why this is a bit more valuable, just because they were into that sportiness. Even with this type of watch, even more, it's a dress watch. Often these didn't even come on the actual bracelet. I do have brings in my wristwatch check of the day. It is an Oyster, the same type, with a Jubilee. So some of them came on Jubilee, some of them came with factory leather. So it shows you, even though the case is waterproof, some of them came on leather. So they're both for both purposes. Honestly, it is thinner. It feels thinner. It feels like a lighter watch. That could work for its advantage or its disadvantage. I think now it's a disadvantage just because people like the heavier watches. People like the thicker cases. Now, if we go across, now both of these watches are technically 34, but let's go into the actual measurement here. Going at, not including the crown, 34.4. If I move it around 38, let's say 34.5, so 34 and a half. And then let's go with the Omega excluding the crown. So it wears a little bit less if you go across 34. It's more exact towards 34. But if you look at the other 33, yeah, so a little less. But even if you look at the actual Rolex, the case, the lugs, it's like trenched lugs here. Here it's like thick lugs, and that's why it's more sporty. I'm guessing that's why the price is more. It's mostly because of the name brand. You can pick these up any day, depending on the price, depending on the dealer, but under 1,000. These are mostly under 1,000, sometimes even under 500. This quality, though, is very good. It keeps its case here. The Seamaster is all there. Seamaster logo is in the back. It's all there. And then Rolex here, it's pretty good condition. It has been polished. As you see, it's a hand-wound movement. No real bubble back because there's no rotor, none of that type of thing. But it's the way they made it. Still, it's a very nice watch, Swiss made on the bottom. Also here on the Seamaster. Now, a price aside, what is the aesthetic most people want? I'm going to say this, even though I really do love this Seamaster here, I'm going to say this one just because it's all stainless steel. The stainless steel's in. Very few, people don't want to go for plated. It looks a little gaudy. It looks a little cheaper. This watch is incredible. I'm not saying these are cheap watches at all. This is my personal watch. I will stand by these watches, and I think even if they double in their value on some of these pieces, it's still a bargain. Like, it's unreal the bargain you can get on these Omegas. But this one I completely fell in love with. That sunburst effect on that dial, it makes it look completely different in other light. And then the Rolex here is this beautiful white dial. Reminds me of their Explorer that went up. I know it's a different dial configuration, but it's the white OP. Both of these watches, unbelievable. What would you choose? I showed you some measurements today. I talked about the movement. This is more, I'm guessing, the people would say this is more towards an older look, an older man look, and this is a little bit younger.
This case shape, I have to tell you, has never gone out of style. It's unbelievable. That's why the Rolex, they're very good at making the same case for 50 years now, 60 years, actually 20s. I guess the Oyster case came out, but they really perfected it during this time. And the Omega, there's so many configurations, there's so many different movements, also with Rolex, but I think that's maybe why. And Omega, the Rolex is the king of marketing. They really are, and that's probably why it's more money per se, but this has more complication. It has that rotor in there. Both movements are cool, but this has, it's a little bit more, that's what I feel, but it is also 62. But these are very, very close. Last close-up look while I'm doing my outro. Also, the lume dots are kind of cool on this one. It's not, this has no lume dots, but that's another thing they added. Lume dots. The Swiss made is also different. These are not the exact watch, of course, but they're very, very similar. This beat at similar beats to a little faster on the Omega. But I would love to hear your opinions down in the comments. Which one would you rather have? And which one would you love? I understand the sportiness of the Rolex. Even if I was given both, say choose one, I would choose this just because it looks a little younger, but I understand the appeal of this. This is my personal watch. I love the history of these watches, and I think they definitely need to be heard. I think more collectors, I think this is the best way to get into Swiss watches, period. I think it's better than buying a Tag Heuer, better than buying mid-level brands, Tissot, Swatch. This to me is better than all that. This is a different caliber of movement. It's a different caliber of manufacturer. Back then in the 60s too, well, Rolex, they used stainless steel always, but Omega made more affordable pieces every day, man. They made it like the everyday. Rolex too, but it was starting to get a little bit expensive, but it was still very affordable at this time. But Omega, they produced watches, all 316L stainless steel, which not all companies can say. Timex was chrome plated. You see Seikos, most of them were base metals back then. Believe it or not, there was a time where Seiko used base metals. So it's very cool that this is gold plated, stainless. It's really stainless steel. Also 316 on that Rolexes before they switched over, and using gold, they use solid gold on the indexes and hands. Blued second hand too. I always have to mention, you probably noticed that beautiful blued second hand on that dial. Very cool hands. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I would love to hear in the comments what you think about both of these pieces. Do you think it's a fair comparison? I think it is, because they both have in-house. They're both actually amazing watches, both fantastic to own. So thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.